Welcome to the Marketing Report. My name is Russell Pearson and this is episode number 52. The Marketing Report is a podcast for passionate yet frustrated business owners who are looking for a competitive edge. And our series on ethical business continues with another fantastic interview today. This is a partnership that I'm doing with Moral Fairground, and we're going to be bringing you businesses that are sustainable, ethical, and looking at social enterprise as a way they go about doing business. Now, if you want to know more about Moral Fairground, go to moralfairground.com.au. They've also got an awesome event coming up on the 30th of November. That's Fair at Square, and you can check that out again at moralfairground.com.au. But today's interview is with another fantastic guest, and they are from Flying Fox Fabrics. So please make her feel welcome, Felicity Wright. Thank you, Felicity, for joining me.
Thank you very much, Russell.
Fantastic to have you here, and it's a really interesting discussion that we are now having with so many businesses from all across Australia about how they have created and how they sustainably keep going with their social enterprises and ethical businesses. Can you tell us a little bit about your business?
So my business grew out of a project. I was running a large art centre in the Northern Territory. An art centre is an Aboriginal-owned artist cooperative. That is essentially a social enterprise.
Gotcha.
We were printing on fabric, had an 8-metre table. The fabric was beautiful, but we also were visited by people who'd come in and visit the art centre. We had about 10,000 visitors a year, and they'd look at the fabric, go, oh, that's beautiful. What do you do with it? Do you make tablecloths? You know. And I was watching this and we had these beautiful designs, and I thought, you know, we need to value add. We need to create something out of this incredible fabric, because not everyone's a sewer. In fact, that rules out about 50% of the population immediately. Oh, I shouldn't be sexist, but so I was thinking about this, and I'd spent 2 years in Cambodia under the AVI program, Australian Volunteers International.
Yep.
And whilst I was there, I wasn't part of my work, but I was looking at craft cooperatives and I was talking to people, and I'd been a regular buyer of some of the handicrafts. They call them handicrafts in Cambodia. So I started to think, that could be interesting. And potentially we could have people making things from our products and thereby creating an economy or a fair trade in Cambodia. And we could have the products made into something that makes them much more attractive to people. You know, it's a piece of fabric.
Sure.
So I started that when I was at the art centre and did it for 6 years. Because of my links, I'd been in Cambodia, went to an art centre. I'd actually worked there 20 years earlier, which is completely bizarre. So I knew the people really well, and I just love textiles. You know, it's a thing. You know, there's people out there who just love textiles.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's just one of those things. So, I approached someone who was a friend of mine in Cambodia and said, could you make something out of fabric? And she said, well, why not? That's a very Cambodian response, you know, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that.
Yeah, why not? And so it started in a very small way. I started it myself when I was working at the art centre. So I was consulting for the art centre, but I just thought, I don't want to take the risk for them. I want to see if it works. Mm-hmm. So I paid for it all at the outset. And then when the first batch of products came back, it was just so clearly hit the mark. So that's when I continued to run it for the art centre. Then the art centre took it on, and I was there for 6 years. Then I left in early 2019, and I wasn't sure the project couldn't continue without me because it was my networks and my IP.
Yeah. And
so the Cambodians said to me that it had become a really big project. I had 4 fair trade partners, and they said to me, you know, what's going to happen? So I approached art centres again and said, are you interested in this? And some said, yeah, absolutely. So it expanded. So it now works with a number of different art centres. And that's the project. But I've actually got some props because it's kind of a confusing thing for people. So I've got some props here to show.
Yeah, great. I was going to ask you, what is the finished result? Is it like tapestries or that sort of stuff?
Okay, this is a piece of fabric. Yep. Okay, this is hand printed. Now, this is the very basics of Flying Fox Fabrics, and this is where I do quite a lot of education too. Fabric can be embellished in different ways, and one is hand printing. So this is silk screen printing, the old-fashioned. This is what block and silk screen with all the old-fashioned.
Absolutely. I used to do it myself.
Oh, Oh my goodness, that's too easy. Well, actually, I'm telling a lot of people about this, and it's a really great technology in Aboriginal communities, and quite a few communities do it. So it's double, but that's 150 centimeters wide. It's drill, and we had an 8-meter table. Now, this actually was printed in Sydney. Some art centres don't have big enough workspaces, as you can imagine. This comes from Ikunji Artists, which is in Haas Bluff in Central Australia. And they only have a 2-meter table. So they print very, very specific stuff like small silk pieces. But apart from that, this was printed in Sydney for them, and it was designed by Alice Numbajimpa Dixon, and it's rock holes. So you can see it's just it's a 2-colour print.
It's fantastic. And for anyone listening on the podcast, it's like beautiful red earth colours and black circles on quite a large piece of fabric. So does that then become a tablecloth, or is it a tapestry, or like, what are the different uses? There you go. A handbag for everybody at home. Absolutely. We turned it into everything. We've got purses, handbags.
And cushion covers. I haven't got the cushion covers here, but it's okay.
Fantastic.
So this is a little wallet. It is hand printed in Australia.
Yes.
Fully ethical, Aboriginal designed, sourced from the art centre. I work closely with the Kunji artists.
Yep.
And then this product is made in a place called Village Works. The challenge you face having anything hand printed in the 21st century is it's expensive. You know, there's a lot of cheaper technologies, and there's a lot of offshore printing, which is much cheaper. So we have to value add in a way that gives it, dignity, keeps the integrity of the design, the fabric, and it's beautifully made. So they are
very beautiful products. And I guess one of the things that you would be getting from that, there would be limited edition runs of these things. And so what I liked about that is that the purse and the bag and the other pieces that go with it, they were almost like a set.
Well, that's right. Exactly. So I work with fundamentally 4 fair trade social enterprises in Cambodia.
Yep.
They all specialise or work exclusively with disabled people. If any of your listeners know Cambodia, I mean, I've lived there for 3 years actually, but 2 years as an AVI volunteer. There's just so many tragic stories.
Yeah. And
some of the most tragic involve lack of vaccination, so people getting polio. And another big group is landmines. Landmine people. So this particular organisation is called Village Works, and they do beautiful work. And the lady who makes our products for them actually lives in the countryside, and I've met her. And her husband is profoundly disabled, and she has often, because of the way status and things work in Cambodia, disabled people marry disabled people, because there's the whole things that go on in Cambodia. So she makes these beautiful products.
And so just to get some clarity on the way the sort of business works, Flying Fox Fabrics imports fabrics, is that correct?
No, we source the fabrics here. These fabrics are all hand printed in Australia.
Gotcha. Yeah. And then produced outside of Australia.
Exactly. So for example, these bags, I've got this bag. This was hand printed in Australia, but it was actually hand printed in a remote community by Aboriginal printers.
Yeah. So
they have an 8-meter table. This is from Ramingining, Bulbula Arts in Ramingining. This is a different producer. And you can see this little bag here, which your podcast people won't see, but
it's a beautiful little green bag, and again, it sort of indigenous designs, quite all shapes, geometric style things. So but the idea was that it's produced here in Australia. We go overseas and we actually have it then turned into product there as well. So you're really including like a lot of people in that. What's the social enterprise side of things? So how do we engage people, or is it just engaging those communities in the product and in the production?
Well, the social enterprise aspect of it is that it's delivering good or supporting people in different ways. So it's supporting Aboriginal artists in Australia because they create the designs. It's their intellectual property, and they get royalties on every time.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, how that all worked. Yeah, great.
And I'm working with art centres themselves. So art centres are Aboriginal owned. They are Aboriginal owned and governed.
Mm-hmm.
So then they have the space, or they contract somebody to do it, the designs.
Yep.
So any of the proceeds of sales of the fabric. So if I buy the fabric, the price of the fabric goes 100% to the art centre, and then they compensate their printers and their artists, and also selling fabric generates income for them as well. They all get actually really small amounts of government funding. I'm a specialist in remote community art centres and have been since 1986. So I know about them exhaustively. So this is like a passion project. So it's bringing together.
The gallery itself becomes the retail outlet.
The art centre is the retail outlet.
Okay, the art centre. Yep.
Well, they usually wholesale because they're in remote communities.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's online selling. They're more often retailing.
Yep.
So they that's where the revenue goes. So if I buy fabric from an art centre, the money goes to an art centre. Then
yes.
they get that, and the fabric's not cheap. This is actually $100 a metre.
Yeah, I believe it.
Oh, it's hard to rip people off when you're paying $100 a metre.
That's right.
You know, you're paying full tide odds for fabric from remote communities. And so then sending it to Cambodia, I know these little social enterprises as well. They're all involved in fair trade. They're acknowledged amongst the Cambodian Artisans Association. And they then are little small businesses that, as I say, they not only employ disabled people, but they also retrain them and then support them.
Yeah.
So that's a really important element. So Cravan House, who made these, they're amazing. They've been going since 2003, and they've had people working with them since then. I know them. I've known the owner for years, and I've got, photos of people printing this, and they have all sorts of different types of disabilities, from, I don't know that's the way they talk about it in Cambodia.
Yeah.
Handicapped, they actually still say in Cambodia. But you've got polio, landmines, congenital disabilities as well.
Yeah.
And which in a place like Cambodia where there's no social security, like zilch, there's zilch. There's nothing. The health system is shocking. So the only chance, you have to earn a livelihood if you're going to have any form of income. Some people, pick up rubbish or whatever it is just to make a livelihood or live on tips. And so for disabled people, it's pretty hard because there's also stigma in that society. So having these little co-ops. So one of the guys, Mr. Runchiek, was a farmer. 2004, steps on a landmine, there goes his leg, goes one eye.
Yeah.
And he's now an extraordinary master craftsman, and he trains other people. So, they're fantastic. They're real people, and that I'm not, I don't that on your podcast.
We'll find out.
So yeah, to me, it's very real. And so that's when it becomes a social enterprise. It is an enterprise. It's trading. The aim is to make it sustainable and viable. As I always say, when I'm running art centres or providing consulting to art centres and business planning, you're not doing anyone any favors if you set up a business that is not successful, that doesn't make money.
That's right.
Even it's just, if you have to pay, there's a whole lot of costs involved in business. So the idea is to be able to generate income so you can sustain the business and hopefully grow the business, which then grows the benefits.
And it sounds like it's an incredibly inclusive business with the different communities that are involved in it, which moves me on to the next question, which part of this series is really exploring ethics in business. What is ethics to you?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I saw that on the question list. Ethics is nobody being exploited.
Yeah.
It's about doing the right thing. And I think being aware of, I've never understood why trade or business should be unfair. We talk about fair trade, but why should any society allow businesses to function that are exploitative or are not fair? It actually has never made sense to me since I was a teenager, and since I was very young, I was, buying in my teens from CAA, Community Aided Broad Catalogues, before they became Oxfam. I was doing all that stuff. So, to me, ethical is having a set of principles, which I do, which is like it's a bit like I'm also involved in permaculture, care of the earth, care of people, and being ethical in your practices.
Well, it's interesting because it almost sounds like a frame in that I don't think most businesses go out of their way to be unethical, but because they're looking at profit first, then the decision matrix tends to shorten up. Where if you're looking at people first, or you're looking at inclusion first, or you're looking at even sustainability first, well, most businesses should be aiming for that, I would have thought. It just changes the lens as to decision making.
Yeah, and I could get into, but I could get into I could get into a discussion with you about the problem with corporations and that they're set up to serve the interests of shareholders, and they're compelled to be directed by maximising profit before anything else.
Yeah.
Now,
well, even take a step back though, like it's interesting because corporations, it's an interesting phrase. It's almost like a third entity that doesn't actually exist. So there's big corporations, and then there's small corporations. And you've got companies are an incorporated body, and usually there's, often, because we've got a big fat bottom of small business here in this country, there's one managing director, and they run a business and they have 10 employees or 20 employees, and they go about it day to day, and then eventually, they may get in a position where it gets merged or sold and it moves up the food chain. And then it becomes very much a shareholder focus. But the 80% of Australian business that is incorporated is small business. But even in those spaces, there's not a frame on people or community first. It's very much on me looking after my family. If this is the case, I'm pretending to be the managing director in this one. Me looking after my family, and how do I make a living first, and then second is like, how do I then look after my employees, and then third is how do I look after the rest of the community? So it's very interesting when we look at this from there's multiple levels.
I agree, but I would also suggest that small businesses are much more accountable in their communities. My experience, I live in a very small community. I've lived in remote communities, but I also choose to live in a small community in South Australia, and because that really suits me. And, it's the local businesses that get hit up to sponsor the football club. It's the local businesses that get hit up to, be involved in the sailing, the sailing awards or whatever it is. And not just sporting events, but all sorts of things. And also your customer base, when you're a small business, is often much more localized. So I just think there's a much greater level of accountability when you're a partnership or when you're a sole trader.
I like this discussion,
small business.
Yeah, this discussion is good because I think a part of that may even be you have to live in that community, right?
Exactly.
So if you're part of it, even you've gone over to Cambodia and you've spent time with your partners over there. You're part of that community when you're there. You know who they are, you know the people, you know their individual names, etc. Same sort of thing when you're living in a local community here, you're part of it. So you can't really, I won't use the old phrase about doing something where you eat, but you
exactly.
know what I'm talking about. You can't.
I think,
Apparently you're allowed to say it, but I'm not.
Whoops, okay.
No, absolutely.
No,
maybe that's part of it.
I think, look, it really is part of it, but it's also cultural. It's also a cultural context. Like you're talking about going to Cambodia. So just to throw another sort of viewpoint into this, in Cambodia has existed for millennia or centuries on a patronage system. Mm-hmm. So they are very used to having patrons. You had had a ruling class and a very small upper class, and you had a lot of people at the lower levels. And there wasn't really a middle class, like a lot of sort of feudal societies or monarchies.
Yeah.
So they are very used to the idea of a patron. So when I'm in Cambodia, they have created relationships with me, and it really is a patronage relationship, which is a two-way relationship. It's not just that I can get something. I also have a sense of responsibility to them, which is not so different to working with Indigenous Australians, where everything is about relationships. So it's quite fascinating. So in Cambodia, when they said to me, I'd built up this big project. We're sending tens of thousands of dollars a year back to Cambodia when I was up north. And then they're saying to me, oh, are you going to keep it going? And I knew how much work it was, and especially to rebadge it and not under an arts centre banner, but under my own.
Yeah.
I know how much work small businesses, that's why I know a lot. So when they said to me, are you going to keep it going? This was even before COVID, but I'm like, I'll try, because I had that sense of the obligation, and I come back a lot to reciprocity,
Yeah.
which is really how Indigenous people see the world. And this is becoming back to an ethical, the whole issue of what are ethics, that I had entered into a relationship with them. I knew their circumstances. They treated me really well. The Cambodian, like incredibly well, had been so gracious, so welcoming. And one of my longest term partners, Tanan, has just helped me in so many ways in, my needs, and just being so caring of me that I needed to continue to use my position. I had the opportunity to continue something that was good for them. And it was ethical. So I sort of felt that sense of, obligation, and that they saw me as a patron, because being from the West, I do have more power. I do have more access to, markets, to all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So, so that's...
It's an interesting one, because I wonder, like, one of my questions is like, why did you start this sort of business? But I think you kind of answered that to a degree. There's a responsibility and what have you when you actually have these relationships. And I've heard from other business owners, when they've talked about these same social enterprises, it's just the sort of person that they are, and they couldn't do it any other way. What is it for you though? Why did you start? Like, put the project to the side for the art centre, but then you have the opportunity to be potentially free of that project, but you decided to start a business. Why did you decide to start?
The other part of me is I've always said it's very strange. Like, I'm sort of I'm not a wholehearted lover of capitalism, but I love business. Yep. There's this sort of paradigm within me. Paradox, sorry, is what I mean.
Beautiful conflict.
Yeah, a beautiful paradox. So really, being involved in ethical businesses gives me that satisfaction of watching. And I've realised, because when I started 30-something years ago in 1986 in an art centre, and found I loved what I was doing. It was running a small business. I was very young, and it was so stimulating, and you had to know everything. And you treat them like your own small business. You really do. Yes. And you're working with people, and they're making great stuff and exhibition, and it's very dynamic and a lot of learning. I realized that really met a need in me I love to be active in that space. So coming to making that decision, I'm kind of sitting there going, they're kind of asking me, and then I'm going, well, I do love textiles. I love textiles a lot. I'm crazy about it. So there's that passion. I wouldn't be doing it there's other things I could import from, dried mangoes. Like I've got friends right throughout Cambodia, yes, creating things, but I've got that extra thing, the love factor for the textiles. But the other thing is I've got that damn entrepreneur thing. I've realized, there's a few people who know of me now from some of the work I did, who know I just can't resist an opportunity. If you see, hey, this could happen. And given that we'd shown it was so successful, and I thought, this is an opportunity. How can I let this go? So yeah, that's
where
kind
did the
of the
entrepreneurial spirit come from? Is it passed on from other generations? Is it just was it your upbringing, or was it just the environment? What was it?
I'm laughing. There's my dad was in business. He was too nice to be in business, but
I know the feeling.
Yeah, really. He was, and he had a bit of a rocky road, but he loved customer service. He loved business. He really liked people. And he had 7 kids. I'm the youngest, and there's only 2 of us who have any interest in business. And my sister in Melbourne does markets called Right Angle, selling things she makes that generate money for refugees, because that's her thing. It's all yes. The proceeds go to refugees. She's fabulous. And me, and all the others couldn't, and not even remotely interested in business. And so it's been really interesting that I have been able to bring those 2 things, because I'm passionate about social justice. And I tell you, the biggest gift of my life was finding myself in a remote community working with Aboriginal people, which was totally out of left field, totally unplanned. Left Melbourne on my big trip around Australia, and 6 weeks later, I'm in a remote community, and this is the old days, no telephones, no nothing. Yes. And I'm being offered a job working with an art centre. It was bonkers. I had no, it shouldn't really have happened. But God, I thank the guidance that got me there, because I have just had such a lucky, privileged life to be working with Indigenous Australians, and now all over Australia. You know, I've been from Cape York to Melbourne to the Kimberley, and you know, I've done a lot of work with people and lived with people. I've lived out bush for more than 12 years.
Yep.
In 4 different communities. So I just, and that's been a total joy. So for me, it's also seeing that now, after plugging away and carrying on about fair trade and ethical business for such a long time, over 30 years, it's a joy now to see the awareness growing.
Yes.
You know, it could have come sooner, hey, but you know, all of us in that
Well, funnily enough,
know
I was just speaking to our last guest about this subject, because it was only now 3 episodes ago that I interviewed my own daughter, because she had just completed a sort of a founder's course around social enterprise. And so one of the discussions is that, you know, youth of today, you know, it's an old phrase, are really have a values alignment with it, and that they understand that they have a part to play in the world, and they can actually see how sort of a triple bottom line business can actually do great things for the entrepreneurial side of things, as well as for the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's like you feel like here. This is where you feel it. You seriously, you know, this is where you feel it when you can sleep at night. You can. It's not pride. That's the wrong word. It's just this really quiet satisfaction of knowing that you've made a difference to people's lives, and you've given them opportunity. And I sometimes forget, because this is just what I do. I've been doing it for a long time, in one way or another. And then someone will stop and say it to you, you know, an Aboriginal person or a Cambodian or something. I've got a great little message. I tell you, Aboriginal Cambodians talk in Camblish sometimes, like it's a mixture of Cambodian and English, you know.
Yes.
And I got this beautiful little message from one of my Cambodian producers to give to Akunji Arts, you know, who this is their fabric, just to say, please tell your customer, thanks so much, because it's given 7 disability ladies 1 month's work. And this is somebody who's, when I contacted her 2 months ago due to COVID, she was distraught. And she said, when my new year happened in April, when everything hit, usually everyone goes home, because disabled people, mobility is an issue. So they often live, you know, relatively together in a workshop, and it's supported in that way.
Yep.
And usually they go home for, you know, the provinces for their new year. And she said, so I told them all, you don't have to come back. You know, if you don't want to come back, she said, so she gave them a payment and said, you don't have to come back. And she said, she said, oh, but if you go, I can't. No, she said, if you go, I don't think I can employ you to come back. And she said, only one chose to go home.
Yeah.
And she said, and I've been paying them ever since with no business, because the communities, as you can imagine, if you go to a place like Cambodia or anywhere, handicraft producers have their own outlets, so they have shop fronts.
Yes. Yep.
And they're selling direct, and that's a really good margin for them, because they're selling direct, they're making their own products. So if you take out tourism, if you take out
absolutely,
sales, most of them have closed their shops. So I can only give them wholesale work at this stage, you know, because I'm asking them to make for me. But it's keeping people, you know, alive.
Yeah, which is absolutely fantastic.
Pretty humbling.
Like I said at the start, you've got such an inclusive business. Now, it sounds like obviously there's a lot of great stories, but we want to hear about some of the other side as well, for all those people who are thinking about starting a social enterprise or what have you. What are some of the struggles? What are some of the struggles you've faced on the way through?
Okay. Do you want me to be really honest?
Please. Well, you know.
Okay. So running an art centre, and then in my work, I would be contacted at least once a month, if not once a fortnight or once a week, by somebody writing to me and saying, I'm thinking of starting a social enterprise, and if you can just give us some of your stock, you know, I love Aboriginal art, I love Aboriginal people, can I just get some of your stock and I'll sell it for you, you know, or yeah. And I saw a number of social enterprises start in that time, and I worked with them, like we were providing fabric, and they've gone on, 2 of them have gone on to do really fantastic things over the last 4 years. And they've got big public profiles. And, but off the record, or actually one of them put it on the record in a blog post, they talked about how hard it was, and that they basically hadn't paid themselves wages. Yes. This is a big name. You know, we say in the bush, big name, no blankets. You know, it's like, we're Rumpy Band saying, I think they had an album called that, but it's like big name, no blankets. So, you know, these fantastic, they're fantastic couple doing this great stuff. I love what they've done to promote hand printed fabrics and Aboriginal culture. They've done an extraordinary job, and yet it's tough. And from the outset, when they were buying from us, I could see they were buying hand printed fabric, and the margins weren't there. I could see it straight up. Yes. The margins weren't there because the fabric's so expensive, and we can't make it cheaper because I was working out cost prices. And I mean, I'm a business planner. You know, it was all run so the art centre would stay viable, and we were selling direct as well. So I think there's a lot of good intent. There's a lot of well-meaning people, and things look great on Instagram. I mean, you would have heard this.
They absolutely do. And there's all sorts of, especially fashion, trying to make a name of Instagram. But I think the word is sustainable, because a lot of people think about sustainability when it comes to business as one thing, when in actual fact, it's the ability to continue to run and continue to trade in a way that actually provides the outcome that you're after.
That's exactly the sustainability I use.
Yeah.
That's the one that's what I'm talking about, viability. I'm talking about when one of them came to, you know, another one came to me and talked to me. She was setting up a foundation, and she said, "Oh, I'm setting up this foundation because I've got to work out where the profits go," and was talking about this. And I said, sweetheart, just try and make a business that makes a profit before you worry about where you know, doing all your preparation. You're spending 6 months trying to come up with guidelines about how they disperse it. And I said, we just need you to buy fabric. You know, if you buy fabric, if you're buying fabric from us, which means our printers in business, and it keeps our designers in printers in business, that's all we need. We don't need you telling us what you're going to do with your profits. I don't care. You know, really, just please. And I know that person later told me they, again, weren't really paying themselves. And
that's the thing. Sometimes in the startup phase, some of the best businesses I've seen have actually paid themselves very, very little because they reinvested so much early, but they knew that going in. That was part of the plan. You know, there was, you know, how are they going to actually live? How are they going to sustain themselves through those early years? So I guess that's some of the things that they've had as problems. So what would be a tip that you would give to someone looking to start, other than make a profitable business from the get-go?
I think it's a little bit like that, you know, intern at places. Get close to other people doing it. I have a person I'm very fond of in Cambodia, Hannah Guy, who runs Dorsu. Terrific person, went to Cambodia, set up in Kampot, and has just been on this continual improvement thing. You know, she had a little clothing shop, and with, you know, in partnership with a Cambodian lady, and she'd actually done some preparatory stuff in Australia. She'd also worked with enterprise learning projects, who'd set up another one of the business I was talking about. Yep. And so she'd got a foundation in understanding. Business is not glamorous. I think one of the challenges for working in this space and working with very photogenic products and things that people love, like they become very emotional about a bag, you know, and you know, clothing, Indigenous. There's a lot of emotion in that, but it's 90-something% grunt work.
Yes.
I don't know how long I spent. I spent months earlier this year uploading things to Etsy, finessing, playing, trying to get good photographs, getting frustrated with myself because I'd delegated to staff in the past. And, you know, they'd actually taken much better photos than I give them credit for. So I'm sorry, guys. Sorry, Lauren. So yeah, I did that for ages. And by, you know, March, I only done 16 sales in 2-3 months.
Yep.
But I kept going, no, I've got to keep doing this, you know, and I put hours and hours finessing the text, doing this, thinking about it. Yeah, you know, and that's that grunt work, it's laborious and it can be really lonely. And that's why I'd also say to people, talk to other people about it and be honest about what you're facing, because there's also a whole lot of, you know, competition, especially our society is very much predicated on competition. I'm so grateful that, I mean, I was acculturated in that way too, but I'm really grateful I spent so much time with Aboriginal people, and that's a collective collaborative society, and I really like to collaborate. So share. There's going to be some people who are always competitive types, you know, that's the thing. But if you can share, seek out mentors, seek out people who will share their experiences, or intern in those and watch. Because look, I'm an experiential learner. I'm very, and I think, you know, what is it, 80% of people are really. And get close and be ready for a slog. Because
and I particularly like what you said about the internship side of things. You know, back in the day, they still do this, is they have work experience, and it's a week here and a week here. A week's not enough. You need to understand how a business operates. You know, look at the different parts. Can you play a role in the production bit? Can you play a role in the management? Can you play a role in the sales and marketing? And understand how the pieces all go together, because I think that goes such a long way. And then you're spot on about the mentor. If you can find a mentor, there are so many business communities, whether they be in social enterprise or not, that are incredibly inclusive because of that loneliness factor, because people are looking for someone who understands and can talk to them. So definitely do outreach. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really significant. Yeah, because I don't want to bang on about how tough it is, but it and the other thing is, I think really people underestimate the diversity of skill sets you need in a small business. And also, I would really encourage, and this is something I found from doing HR and recruiting people, and I'm not going to talk about generational stuff, even though it's a little bit tempting. One thing I found staff really struggled with was acknowledging their weaknesses. And I think they're also taught that, like, you know, you're not supposed to admit your weaknesses in a business interview, or you're supposed to. And I actually did interviews where I'd ask staff, you know, so what are your weaknesses? And people would sit there and go, I don't know. And it's like, wow, you know, and I think that's the thing I've learned with aging and with experience. I know my weaknesses. I know my crappy bits. And if I can find someone who loves detail, who loves bookkeeping, or is happy to keep good, tidy records of things, or can clean up. I'm terrible with tidying. I'm shocking. This is hilarious. This is Felicity calling out to anybody who's looking to do an internship. This is how she's doing it. What I'd like to know, Felicity, is where's the future? Talk to me about the future of Flying Fox Fabrics. Where are we going from here? Just to finish on that, though, I think if young people can say, okay, my strengths are great and I'll work on those, but acknowledge, not being ashamed, not being afraid to say what you're not, you know, I think there's a fear, people to acknowledge what they're not strong in. And I would really encourage them to go, okay, it's okay to admit that, because then I can either work on improving that, or just then I can work on dedicating myself to other things that I'm strong in. The future is... Actually, before you jump off that, now you've got me to say something. One of my colleagues works very closely with coaching millennials. And one of the things that she's certainly come to the realization of is that, and she's one of them as well, there's a cotton wool culture that has actually got to a point where no one's getting the feedback, so they know where those things are. They know where those spaces are. They know I'm good in this area. I need to either improve or this area, or at least understand that that's not an area of strength. So there's probably not enough feedback, and they haven't had the chance to break bones and scrape knees and do all the things that I guess you know, we've done in the past. Yeah, that's right. And I tried to convey to my staff, if I'm giving you feedback, it's not to bring you down. It's in my interest to see you thrive. It's in my interest to see you get stronger and better. And, you know, and it's in my interest to see more social entrepreneurs be strong and be there. And the thing, you know, if they're going to stay in Instagram land and be scrolling and focusing on the beautiful side or the external presentation side, they're going to really trip up, because it's just, and it's, you know, it's learning to love the hard bits. It's learning to say, I'm going to do this because I don't particularly like it, but I know it's going to make, you know, I need to do it. It's going to make my business stronger, and I'm going to recognize that. And if I can ever afford to pay someone else to do it, I will. I like to think business is this. For anyone who can't actually see, it's a Rubik's Cube. This is business for me. It's this idea of actually putting the puzzle together in all these different ways. Now, it gets really frustrating, but there is a way to get it right, you know? So, yeah.
So,
all right, future. Tell me about the future of Flying Fox Fabrics.
okay, so I'm. What's happened? It's kind of morphed a little bit. It's it's so fascinating what comes in from left field. So, okay, so I've always been a collaborator. I'm collaborating with another organisation a lot at the moment called Better World Arts. She's always been an inspiration since 1996, and in the early 2000s I met her. And that's a product. That's a project based with Here I'm Going Here. I wasn't going to sell this through Flying Fox, but it's a beautiful stuff. Hand-stitched cashmere, they're woolen, killams, cushion covers, rugs, a traditional Kashmiri craft with Indigenous. I know Lawrence, I've worked at Papalunkaja artists. I know Lawrence who did this painting. Artists love it. They get royalties. They also love the product.
The future is collaboration, and we're unfortunately going to have to wind up. But where can they find out more about collaboration, more about Flying Fox?
I have two main sites to go to. One is Flying Fox Fabrics, so it's www.flyingfoxfabrics.com. Don't need the AU, you can use it, but
we've got both.
And I got both. And the other one is I've got an Etsy store, and that's very active, and the sales have been fantastic on that.
Great.
Yeah, that's done really well. Lots of fabulous reviews. So Etsy, Flying Fox Fabrics on Etsy. So yeah, and I'm happy to, if people want some, some advice, support, whatever, and collaborate. Love it.
Fantastic. Well, Felicity, thank you so much for being with me. I really appreciate your time. Clearly, Felicity is absolutely passionate about her business. She's passionate about social enterprise, social justice, and just about everything in this space, which I think is fantastic, because this is a podcast for passionate people. You know I'm passionate, and you can find out more about me at russellpearson.com. If you want to have a look at what Moral Fairground are actually doing with the event Fair at Square, or even just throughout the year, all the other events they have on, go to moralfairground.com.au. Until next time, stay passionate, and I will see you on the next one.